Section 4 Farming in the West. Background knowledge. While ranchers and cowhands were building a cattle kingdom, hundreds of thousands of farmers were flooding onto the Great Plains. Homesteading. By 1900, 500,000 farmers had settled on the Great Plains. Many were attracted by an offer of free land. Homestead Act. During the Civil War, Congress passed the Homestead Act of 1862. It offered a 160-acre plot to anyone who resided on the land for 5 years. Resided means to live or to dwell for a while. Congress wanted to give the poor a chance to own farms. Thousands became homesteaders, settlers who acquired free land from the government on the Great Plains, but few had the money to move west and start a farm. Also, land companies took over large areas illegally. And on the dry plains, 160 acres was too small to grow enough grain to profit. Only one homesteader in 3 lasted the required 5 years. Railroads promote farming. In fact, railroads promoted more farming than did the Homestead Act. More farms meant more shipping for Western railroads. So the railroads gave away some of the 180 million acres they got from the government. They recruited thousands of people from the eastern United States, Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia to settle on the Great Plains. A hard life on the plains. Life on the Great Plains was not easy. Water was scarce and crops were hard to grow. Farmers struggled to make ends meet. Busting sod. The first farmers on the eastern plains staked out sites near water and trees. Later arrivals continued on to the treeless prairie. The farther west one went, the drier the climate became. The soil of the plains was fertile. It was covered with a thick sod or a surface layer of earth which the roots of grasses tangle with the soil. With little rain, sod baked into a hardened mass. Early settlers, lacking wood, cut sod into bricks to build walls. 2 rows of sod bricks made walls that kept homes cool in the summer and warm in the winter. New farming methods. Farmers broke through the tough sod with plows. The sod often cracked plows made of wood or iron. In 1877, John Deere of Illinois invented a sod-busting plow made of steel. Steel plows were stronger and lighter than other plows. Plains farmers, or sod busters as they were known, used machines called drills to plant crops. The drills buried seeds deep in the ground where there was moisture. Farmers used reapers to harvest crops and threshers to beat off the hard coverings of the grains. Water often lay hundreds of feet below ground. Farmers used windmills to pump the water out. To keep cattle from trampling crops, farmers put up fences. Lacking wood, they used barbed wire. Joseph Glidden of Illinois farmer invented the twisted metal wire in 1874. Farm families. Whole families worked on the farms. Men labored from dawn to dusk. Children tended animals and helped with other chores. Life was also hard for women. Besides keeping house, they helped plant and harvest. They educated children. They nursed the sick. They sewed clothing, preserved food, and made such basics as candles and soap. Exodusters. Thousands of African Americans, many of them former slaves, streamed onto the plains. By the early 1880s, perhaps 70,000 African Americans had settled in Kansas. These settlers were known as exodusters because they believed they were like the Jews fleeing slavery in Egypt, a biblical story told in the book of Exodus. Some exodusters took up farming, others moved to towns. Men often worked as hired hands and women as laundresses. The Spanish Southwest. In the Southwest, along the border with Mexico, arriving settlers found Spanish-speaking farmers and sheep herders. Many had been there since before the Mexican-American War, when the United States had acquired this territory. The coming of the railroads brought more immigrants from Mexico. Many helped build the new lines. Some of the older Hispanic residents were large landowners known as ricos. They fought to keep their land deeded under Spanish or Mexican law. A last rush for land. By the 1880s, few areas on the plains remained free to settlers. The federal government agreed to open Oklahoma to homesteaders, boomers, and Sooners. On April 22, 1889, nearly 100,000 people gathered at a line near present-day Oklahoma City. These were the boomers. They had come to claim some of the 2 million acres of free homesteads in what was once Indian territory. At noon, a volley of gunfire signaled the start of the Oklahoma land rush. A few people, known as the Sooners, had already sneaked onto the land. They jumped from hiding and grabbed the best land. Other rushes followed until all 2 million acres had been claimed. The frontier closes. In 1890, the National Census reported that the United States no longer had land available for homesteading. In the West, there can hardly be said to be a frontier line, the report stated. Farmers organize. Wheat and grain from plains farms fed the growing cities of America and Europe. A few big farmers prospered, but small farmers faced an economic crisis and quickly organized to end it. Crisis on the farm. The more grain farmers hauled to the market, the lower grain prices fell. Farmers were producing a surplus of crops. One Kansas farmer complained that we are poorer by many dollars than we were years ago. Small farmers were hit the hardest by low grain prices. Many had borrowed money for land and machinery. As prices fell, plains farmers could not repay their loans and lost their land. In the South, tenants and sharecroppers fell deeper into debt as the cotton prices fell. Cooperatives and political parties. Many farmers lived in poverty and isolation. Some communities began to form granges, groups of farmers who met for lectures, sowing bees, and other events. In 1867, local granges joined to form the National Grange. What began as a social and educational movement evolved into an economic protest. In the 1870s and 1880s, grangers demanded the same low rates from railroads and warehouses that were given to big farmers. They elected state officials who passed laws limiting rates. A group called the Farmers Alliance organized in the late 1870s to help farmers. It set up farm cooperatives, which are groups of farmers who pool their money together to make large purchases of tools, seeds, and other supplies at a discount. In the South, both whites and blacks joined the alliance. In 1892, unhappy farmers joined with members of labor unions to form the Populist Party. This was a political party that pushed for social reforms It demanded public ownership of railroads and warehouses to control rates, a tax on income to replace property taxes, an 8-hour workday, and other reforms. Populists wanted to use silver in addition to gold as a basis for money supply. With more money circulating, populists hoped to see inflation or a general rise in prices. They believed rising grain prices would help farmers pay off their debts. In that way, the farmers could avoid foreclosure. The taking of property to settle a debt. Summing up populist demands, Kansas activist Mary Elizabeth Least said, "We want money, land, and transportation. We want the power to make loans direct from the government. We want the cursed foreclosure system wiped out." The election of 1896. In the presidential election of 1896, populists supported Democrat William Jennings Bryan, known as the Great Commoner. Bryan won the votes of farmers from the South and West for supporting the use of silver to rise prices. Bankers and business owners claimed rising prices would ruin the economy. They backed Republican William McKinley and his Gold Loan Standard. McKinley won. Republicans took both the White House and Congress for the first time in decades. The populists faded. Although the major parties absorbed many of their ideas, most Americans saw no link between farm problems and their own. Looking back and ahead, farmers found it hard to make a living, so they organized to demand reforms. In the next chapter, you will read about the rise of big business and labor.